Pustimo se malo skupa ljudi.
Da malo ubrzamo, jer nećemo do 10 navečer.
Rekli su nam iz uprave hotela da moramo najkasnije do ponoći otići. Sljedeće predavanje je Crisium Code, nema veze sa krizom, ima veze sa križevcima. Kolega Andrej Dundović, izvolite.
Me čujete? Dobro. Ne, mogu ovako. Dobar dan, ja sam Andrej Dundović. Ovdje sam pred udrugom P.O.I.N.T. Iako sam aktivan i u LZS-u i u ovim SSH-u koji nisu strojari. Uglavnom, ovdje ću vam prezentirati jedno praktično iskustvo. O čem se radi? Evo, pogledajte. Znači, QR, ne. Do prije par godina ljudi nisu znali šta je QR, a sad iskače iz paštete. Tako da, vjerujem da ne trebam govoriti šta je QR. Imate čak ovoga i ove web stranice koje se protive upotrebi QR-a. Političke stranke se osnivaju protiv QR-a. Ono što isto ste vjerojatno čuli je upotreba QR-a u turističkoj promociji. To isto nije novost. Evo, prije nekih godinu dana i turistička zajednica grada Zagreba postavila na ove znakove turističke, također QR-ove. Nešto slično prije nego što su oni to počeli smo imali ideju i mi u Križevcima, koji je pun znamenitosti, jedan od najstarijih hrvatskih gradova, međutim ima dosta slabu turističku ponudu. To je problem mnogih malih mjesta u kontinentalnoj Hrvatskoj. Dakle, šta je bila naša ideja? Kako doprinijeti turističkoj promociji? To smo napravili preko inicijative Crisium Code. Zašto ovo pričam uopće na ovoj konferenciji? Zato što smo to realizirali isključivo uz pomoć slobodnog softvera i samu web aplikaciju koju smo implementirali. Za ove potrebe smo također izdali kao slobodan softver. Poslije ću objasniti zašto. Kako radi Crisium Code? Dakle, imate web aplikaciju u koju se prijavite i postavite linkove za koje želite dobiti QR i ona izgenerira QR kod koji je spreman, znači, za tiskanje. Znači, ima sve linije reza i sve druge kalibracijske stvari potrebne za precizno graviranje laserom. To je znači prva funkcija web aplikacije. Druga funkcija web aplikacije je zapravo da preusmjerava, jer ovdje nije hardkodiran eksterni link, nego interni link na ovu aplikaciju, pa onda aplikacija redirekta posjetitelja automatski na stranice koje su povezane unutar same aplikacije, znači neki tag koji povezuje na neku pravu adresu. Zašto je to tako? Pa zato što su ove pločice relativno trajne, dok se silikonom postave na pokraj neke znamenitosti, one se više ne diraju i onda je problem ako se promijeni nešto, onda je puno elegantnije promijeniti link softverski nego mijenjati pločicu. Dakle, ovo je samo ukratko, to me prijatelj nagovorio, rekao je ovo je tehnička konferencija i onda moraš malo dijagrama, specifikacije pokazati, ali vidio sam da vam je više dosta danas prevelikog mozganja, pa ću samo ukratko spomenuti o čem se radi. Znači, ovo je prilično trivijalna aplikacija koja koristi već postojeće biblioteke iz Pythona, Pythonove biblioteke, dakle, moguće je prijava preko LDAP-a ili preko plain teksta, odnosno HT passworda. I onda imamo, znači, storage gdje samo stoje tag value vrijednosti, odnosno tag link. Generator koji se pokreće samo prvi put dok je tag postavljen i onda, mislim, nema neke filozofije. Ono što je prednost, zašto smo i to napravili, izdali kao slobodan software, da svako drugi može na sličan način, znači preuzme samo našu aplikaciju i može pokrenuti samostalno, zato što ovaj Battle framework koji smo koristili ima ugrađen HTTP server, ili ono što je za produkcijska okruženja puno bolje, Unicorn i Nginx. Licenca je afera GPL verzije 3. Zašto slobodan software? To je sad ono što sam zapravo želio naglasiti u ovoj prezentaciji. Znači, prvo je ključno da se slobodan software ponovo iskoristi. U smislu da zbilja neko može doći na stranice ove inicijative i preuzeti kod i postaviti ga u svoje svrhe. Znači, za druge inicijative i projekte. To znamo. Druga stvar koja je vrlo bitna je opstojnost inicijative. Dakle, ovu inicijativu je realizirala udruga, nevladina organizacija. I uvijek je problem sa nevladinim organizacijama kad to rade volonteri, što je tu problem dugotrajnosti i opstojnosti nekih inicijativa i projekata. I onda treba misliti na to što će biti kada, recimo, ja više ne budem aktivan član te udruge, ili kada dođu novi ljudi, ili kad se udruga rasformira. Što će onda biti sa svim tim pločicama koje smo polijepili po gradu? Znači, treba smisliti kako lako to prenijeti na druge. Odnosno, recimo, na turističku zajednicu grada Križevaca. Tu je slobodan software očito odgovor, zato što jedini je zapravo problem je domena. Znači, domena Križevci EU, na kojoj vode sve ove pločice, nju bi morali zbilja prenijeti na nekoga. Ali sve drugo se može skinuti, znači cijeli software, cijela baza tagova se može skinuti i postaviti na drugoj lokaciji. Na taj način osiguramo opstojnost te inicijative. I zadnja ovoga stvar, što je cijela inicijativa provedena onako u duhu slobodnog softvera, transparentno, online, znači postoji dokumentacija cijelog pothvata, sam kod, i to bi trebao biti kao neki školski primjer kako zapravo sve nevladine organizacije trebaju djelovati, zato što na kraju u većini slučaja dobivaju financije od društva, odnosno javnih financija. Tako smo i mi za realizaciju ove inicijative dobili financijsku podršku od Zamaha i Zaklade za razvoj civilnog društva. Eto, to je bila kratka prezentacija. Ovdje možete vidjeti dvije slike kod Gradskog muzeja na stupu. Jedna je, znači kod Hrvatskog doma nismo mogli baš dobiti dopuštenje da stavimo na zid i to je bilo jako loše sa estetske strane, pa smo postavili na obližnju vazu za cvijeće. Sanduk zapravo. Eto, pitanje.
Možeš reći malo samo o ovoj tehnologiji, ovih pločica?
U kojem smislu?
Kako su napravljene? Lijepo.
Aha, da, znači, ove pločice, možete doći pogledati, su plastične i to smo birali, znači, materijal da bude što otporniji na vremenske uvjete i habanje. Jedini je problem malo refleksija. Ako vidite, nije iz svih kuteva kontrast dobar. Ali jednom kad se to aplicira silikonom na bilo koju površinu, dosta dobro drži. Do sad nismo imali, iako već nekih pol godine to stoji, vandali nisu uspjeli to skinuti. Ili nije bilo dovoljno interesantno da to skinu. Eto, i mislim, može se to izraditi i u drvetu i kamenu i naravno i kao naljepnice.
Bitno da nije metalna pa da ne završi negdje. Ima kako pitanje kratko, nema? Super. A ima?
Ne znam sam te dobro shvatio, to je posebna aplikacija postoji.
Da, znači to je web aplikacija napisana u Pythonu koja koristi već postojeće biblioteke za generiranje QR-a, za templating kao Mako. koja znači samo to objedinjuje i omogućuje da se brzo postavi i koristi. Znači,
Hvala.
molim.
U redu, hvala lijepa. Sljedeće predavanje je... Drago mi je da na konferenciji imamo predavača svih generacija, od malo starijih pa do mladih studenata. Sljedeće predavanje ima Samuel Picek. Tema je WebRTC, novi standard za komunikaciju.
Multipoint, WebRTC.
Okay.
Samo sekundu da ja sredim ovaj projektor. Jel to radi? Samo sekundu. Samo sekundu. U najboljem trenutku umre touchpad. Malo, samo sekundu da sam. Ne, klik ne radi. Prvo kliknut pa ne radi. Da, nije Linux, laptop je iz 2005. tako da. Sva sreća da radi još uvijek. Samo sekundu. Je li to ok? Kako to radi? Da vidimo. Da, rezolucija, samo sekundu. Tako. Odlično. Ok. Dobar dan svima. Ja imam zapravo poprilično zanimljivu temu i dosta mojih prijatelja zapravo me pitalo kaj je to WebRTC, kaj je to Multipoint, kako su to novi buzzwordovi zapravo. Tako da na početku baš me zanima čisto pitanje radi, koliko zapravo od vas je čulo zapravo za WebRTC? Da, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, ok. Znači, jako zapravo malo od vas. Ova zapravo cijela moja avantura sa WebRTC-om je zapravo krenula upravo radi ove konferencije DORS CLUC. I zapravo ja sam napravio jedan video stream koji zapravo možete vidjeti na ovoj adresi www.nadhala.com/dorscluc. Taj video stream obično predavači pričaju nekakvu teoriju, pa onda pokažu demo. Ja ću sve okrenuti na opačke. Ja ću vam prvo pokazati demo, da vas zainteresiram, ali ću vam ispričati nešto o WebRTC-u. Znači, ako imate podršku za WebRTC, kamera je skroz blizu, najbolje zapravo bi bilo da ja krenem ovak, pošto ja zapravo ne smijem streamat predavanja, pa neka bude vama malo bet. Evo ovak, da vidimo, to, mahni kameri. To je to, bravo. To je zapravo WebRTC. Mala rezolucija u problemima, ali ako imate računalo ovdje, svakako pišite adresu da vidite. WebRTC je zapravo buzzword za Web Real-Time Communication. I zapravo to je ono što sad zapravo pokušavaju cijelo vrijeme napraviti. Kako je zapravo sve počelo? Možda niste impresionirani sa ovim primjerom, ali ovaj primjer je zapravo relativno teško zapravo, mislim teško, nije teško, ali komplicirano je zapravo za izvesti radi različitih problema koji se zapravo pojavljuju. Glavna komponenta, ovo je zapravo bilo vidljivo i prije, ali putem Flasha, Jave, Silverlighta. Ovo zapravo nije nikakav Flash, Java, Silverlight, nego je zapravo ovaj stream je sastavljen zapravo tako da je on nativno integriran u sam web browser. Kako je zapravo došlo do svega toga? Znači, prvo dopustite da se predstavim i pokrenem prezentaciju za promjenu. Moje ime je znači Samuel Picek, dolazim iz Varaždina, student sam na Fakultetu organizacije i informatike i uglavnom volim rješavati zanimljive probleme. Više informacije možete naći na ovim linkovima, kontakt, moji prijašnji radovi i sve ostale stvari, ako vas zanima. Kako je zapravo došlo i zašto ja uopće vama pričam trenutno o WebRTC-u? Ovo je moja trenutno 3. DORS CLUC konferencija. Prva je bila prije 2 godine, kada je bila na Feru, i to je bila zapravo jedna od najboljih konferencija koju sam ja do onda kao klinac, relativno mladi klinac bio. I bio sam zapravo u nemogućnosti slušati jedno predavanje koje me relativno jako zanimalo. Bio neki Django ili JavaScript napredni, nešto je bilo u tome. I pošto igrom slučaja sam ja morao otići sa konferencije, ja sam zapravo vidio da se snima to cijelo predavanje i zapravo otišao sam do kolege koji je zapravo snimao cijelo to predavanje. Ja sam njega pitao, čuj stari, ja bih htio gledati tu konferenciju na streamu, ne mogu biti trenutno u dvorani, da li postoji znači stream oko konferencije? I onda meni zapravo objasnio da se ne streama, nego da se samo snima. I to je zapravo mene dosta ražalostilo i zato potaklo da počnem razmišljati o kako zapravo izvesti to na neki način, gdje zapravo na neki jeftinan način možemo pružiti nekakvu dobru uslugu streaminga. Znači, ukratko da kažemo zapravo što je to WebRTC. Znači, spomenuo sam već da WebRTC je zapravo Web Real Time Communication, znači to je kao nekakav novi buzzword. To je zapravo znači novi standard na kojemu rade 2 glavne organizacije za standardizaciju koje predvode na internetu, znači to je W3 konsortium i on zapravo radi na API levelu, kao JavaScript API levelu, i Internet Engineering Task Force, on zapravo radi na specifikaciji protokola koji zapravo sam WebRTC koristi. WebRTC znači uključuje sve osnovne komponente za nekakvu izgradnju real-time aplikacija u browseru i ti nekakve osnovne komponente se mogu podijeliti zapravo u 3 kategorije, to su znači network, audio i video. Te 3 komponente zapravo rješavaju određene probleme koje su zapravo inicijalno ekipa koja je napravila Google Hangout godinama zapravo rješavala prije nego su uopće pokrenuli standardizaciju oko toga na webu, su uglavnom riješili te probleme i oni su zapravo znali to riješiti i zato su brzo uspjeli relativno pogoniti taj cijeli novi standard oko real-time komunikacije na webu. Znači, spomenuo sam, ako idemo nekakvim top to bottom approachu o učenju WebRTC-a, prvi korak bi bio zapravo, barem po meni, da zapravo spomenem JavaScript API. JavaScript API kao takav je poprilično velik i ovo su 3 glavne komponente koje zapravo WebRTC definira. Get User Media, RTC Peer Connection i Data Channel. Ima još nekoliko API-ova, ali one trenutno još nisu uopće stabilizirani, još nisu useful, mislim jesu, ali u Unstable Editionima Chroma. Get User Media, on vam je zapravo API, putem kada vi njega pozovete iz JavaScripta, on vam zapravo vrati jedan media stream object i taj media stream object vam je zapravo vaša reprezentacija sa kamere. Znači, taj media stream object ima u sebi audio i video koji je primio kao input sa kamere i on znači ima unutar sebe te 2 trake, video i audio, i te 2 trake su zapravo sinkronizirane. I sad kao output od tog media stream objekta zapravo vi možete taj objekt staviti na nekakav video tag ili ga možete poslati nekome na mrežu. Da bi vi zapravo poslali to nekome na mrežu, vi zapravo morate napraviti peer connection kome vi to šaljete. Peer connection se uspostavlja određenim mehanizmom koji je mrežama poznat kao signalizacija i ta signalizacija zapravo nije definirana u samom WebRTC-u, već developer, to jest arhitekt, mora sam odabrati neki od protokola s kojim će napraviti signalizaciju. Bio to Ajax, WebSocket, XMPP, SIP ili neko treće čudo. Znači, peer connection nakon signalizacije gledate tak kao jedan tunel između brauzera A i brauzera B, koji je zapravo iskopao ispod NAT-a, zaobišao sve firewallove i on je zapravo postavio jedan autoput po kojem zapravo putuju u oba 2 smjera media stream objekti. Da bi vi zapravo poslali znači, neke dodatne podatke osim audio i videa putem tog peer connectiona, vama treba treći API i to je data channel. Data channel, zapravo jedanput kad ste vi iskopali taj tunel, vam zapravo govori da će vam on napraviti još jedan treći kanal i po tom trećem kanalu vi možete onda slati nekakve binary failove, tekst i slične stvari. To je to. Znači, kao što možete vidjeti zapravo te tri stvari, glavna je RTC peer connection i zato je zapravo ova slika neophodna, tek toliko samo da vidite koje sve stvari vi kad pečirate Google Chrome ili Firefox na zadnje verzije koje vam podržavaju peer connection, vi dobivate zapravo ovaj code base koji vam rješava sve ove stvari koje su sa zeleno opisane ovdje i tu ljubičasto je zapravo onaj JavaScript API level. Koji je zapravo sad moj problem? Znači, ovo je ukratko WebRTC u 5 minuta. Glavni problem kod mene je zapravo kad sam ja pokušao zapravo napraviti nekakav hangout, recimo, znači simulacija Google Hangouta, Google Hangout zapravo može se spojiti n čvorova u isti RTP session. WebRTC vidite sami da definira samo jedan peer connection. I glavni problem je bilo zapravo kako ja mogu sad spojiti više endpointova, tako da više ljudi se može spojiti na isti stream. I to je zapravo poprilično kompleksan problem, zato jer prvobitno vam pada različite topologije na pamet, no u 5 sati ujutro u magičnoj zemlji RFC-ova sam našao zapravo rješenje svega toga. Postoje zapravo dva rješenja koje su prihvatljiva. Svako ima svoje mane i prednosti. Prvo rješenje je znači multi-unicast, to je poznat kao mesh. Mesh zapravo dijelimo na nekakav partial mesh i na nekakav fully mesh. Partial mesh imate recimo nekakve točkice na bijelome i sad te točkice su povezane s nekakvim crtama i sad u partial meshu on vam diktira da jedna ta točkica mora postati supernode, to jest mora preuzeti ulogu servera. Kada ona preuzme znači ulogu servera, ona zapravo uzima sve RTP sessione koje dobiva i ona agregira sve te RTP sessione i šalje dalje. To zapravo vam trenutno ne funkcionira. Znači, ovo ne možete izvesti sa WebRTC-om uopće. Ako netko zna za rješenje, email je na prvom slajdu. Drugo rješenje je taj fully mesh. U fully meshu zapravo imate recimo, 5 točkica i sad ti 5 točkica svaka povezana sa svakom. Znači, sa peer connectionima. Koji je problem sa tim? Pa problem je sa tim da vi zapravo nemate dovoljno jaki bandwidth da vi možete handlati sa svakim novim čvorom koji dođe unutar Hangouta, unutar tog video conferencing sessiona, vama se poveća zapravo bandwidth koji se koristi. Makar vas ne zanima taj stream. Ne? I to je zapravo glavni nedostatak tog fully mesha, i zato jer je on je samo praktičan za nekakve male hangoute, recimo do 4-5 korisnika. Koja je prednost ove arhitekture? Prednost ove arhitekture je zapravo da ne zahtijeva nekakvu centralni server, osim za signalizaciju. Ne? To je recimo prednost. I ono rješenje koje je zapravo meni fantastično odgovaralo je bilo zapravo ovo. Multipoint Control Unit, točnije MCU, ili u nekim RFC-ovima se to isto zove media server. Kako zapravo Multipoint Control Unit radi? On vam radi tak da zapravo svaki od čvorova koji se želi spojiti u taj session će otvoriti peer connection prema serveru. A server mora biti znači odgovarajuće skaliran i horizontalno i vertikalno, tako da može podnijeti 1000 konekcija recimo simultanih. Kad zapravo on primi sve te peer konekcije, on će zapravo dekodirati sve pakete koje dobi putem RTP-a, agregirati ih i onda enkodirati opet i poslati onome koji treba. Obično, Multipoint Control Unit kao takvi imaju implementiran znači pub-sub pattern, publisher subscriber pattern unutar sebe, tako da svaki stream može publishati sebe na MCU i može se subscribati samo na određene točke unutar tog sessiona. Koja je prednost? Prednost je znači da imam potpunu kontrolu točno kada se događa u tom hangoutu. Zašto mi to treba recimo u use case-u streamanja konferencije? Pa evo, na primjer, sad se ovo predavanje snima, ali istovremeno, ako bi recimo ja streamao cijelu ovu konferenciju putem MCU-a, ja recimo mogu na taj MCU zakačiti određeni FFmpeg driver i snimiti cijelo predavanje. Što je odlično jer ubijam zapravo 2 muhe jednim udarcem. MCU kao takav, znači ima potpunu kontrolu nad bitrateom, encodingom, decodingom, rezolucijom i svim tim stvarima. Koji je nedostatak? Pa trebam zapravo kupiti server i trebam potrošiti nekakve novce da bi zapravo to bilo uopće moguće. To je to, demo ste vidjeli. Više informacija, ovo je stvarno bilo najkraće što sam mogao, više informacija definitivno pogledajte ove linkove, stvarno su korisni, magična zemlja RFC uvijek je zabavna. To je to, ako ima kakvih pitanja, otvoren sam for business. Reci.
Kako je zapravo kompatibilnost sa browserom?
Znači to je jedna od...
Samo usporedbe radi meni u Aurori, koji dakle nije Nightly Firefox, ali ona verzija ispred Nightly-a, recimo ne.
Jel si probao tići u flagove i provjeriti?
Jes, ali ja sam end user, ne?
No,
Zato pitam, tipa, je li to spremno za deployment?
Spremno je za deployment što se tiče lidera u browserima, ne? Kad se tog tiče, zapravo Chrome trenutno ima više od 50%, to jest malo manje od 50% tržišta i radi na Chromeu. Znači na zadnjim verzijama radi sve do data channela, kao end user, ne? A ako nisi end user, onda zapravo ti možeš recimo imati dodatne stvari koje ti pruža WebRTC, tipa snimanje taba. Ako si želiš recimo napraviti prezentaciju i snimiti tu prezentaciju automatski u, ne znam, MP4 formatu, ne, unutar brauzera, to ti je onaj tab recording, to možeš recimo iskoristiti, ne, već sad. Tako da je to zgodno. Ali bit će spremno do kraja godine, ja to garantiram. Mislim, to je moje mišljenje samo, ne.
A je li ima neki fallback za Internet Explorer?
Google Frame samo, ne. To je Chrome Frame, sorry.
Još jedno pitanje, samo kratko molim.
Znači ovako, ako nisi developer i ako ne želiš raditi svoj MCU server, preporučam ti jedan jedini dobar koji sam našao. To je zapravo ovaj treći link ovdje, linkskia.com/licode. On je stvarno ok, ali je problem u tome da opet nije... Mislim, ekipa trenutno raspravlja na hacker space-u zapravo da li je to production ready ili nije, ali postoje zapravo neke firme koje već vrte to u produkciji. Sad, ali opet tvoje pitanje se veže na Dobricu, tako da... Za? Za developere? To ti je to, znači iskoristi si taj MCU, to ti je najbolje rješenje.
A on ima nešto i snimanje i recording i to ili?
Znači na tome trenutno ja radim. Znači nema još, ne, ali imat će, recimo do EFSEC-a će biti. Da.
Kakve su zahtjeve za serverom?
Ne shvaćam pitanje, možete definirati. Da.
Kakvi su zahtjevi za takav server? Do procesiranja videa.
Znači, trebali bi imati dosta memorije i bandwidth. Znači, glavni bottleneck, glavno usko grlo, vam zapravo je bandwidth. Ne? Zato jer svaki stream, recimo ovaj stream je recimo potrošio, ne znam, ovisno koliko je s druge strane korisnika, ali jako dosta troši. Mi smo na razmjeni, recimo u Varaždinu streamali smo razmjenu i bilo je jedno 41-2 korisnika i potrošili su mi otprilike 600 MB, 700 MB prometa. Ne? Znači, to je veći problem nego, ne znam, hard disk ili tak neke druge stvari. Reci.
Malo se zakasnite, mogu ja taj stream ubaciti neke druge podatke, mora eksplicitno.
Znači, ako želiš ubaciti neke druge podatke, onda imaš, kad uspostaviš peer connection, to ti je ovaj data channel. To ti je odgovor. Za? Aha, misliš na ovom streamu? Mislim da čak jesu u Chromeu, zadnja verzija.
Ja bi moramo prekinuti pa nastavite
poslije, može poslije
Our next speaker is Alex Malinovich. Zvuči jako naši gore list. Ima neko Apple adapter za VGA. Toni. Baš mi je drago da imamo ljude iz GitHuba i to naše gore listi. Pričat ćemo malo o kompaniji, današnjem predavanju i prodavanju tih servisa korisnicima i tako dalje. Jedan predavač je zaboravio ovdje jedan stik, tako ko je zaboravio nek se javi. Ja ne bi uzimao adapter od Tonija. Toni, imaš neki koji ne snifa promet. Bingo.
To je malo bolje. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Malinovich, ali moje ime je pravo Aleksandar Malinovich. Žalosno neću moći cijelu prezentaciju da govorim na srpsko-hrvatskom, zato jer ja ne živim već ovdje 25 godina i sve što radim cijeli dan radim na engleskom, tako da mi je mnogo lakše da govorim na engleskom za ovakve stvari. Ali na kraju, ako iko ima pitanja, možete slobodno pitati na hrvatskom i ja ću odgovoriti kako god mogu. So, what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about GitHub, the company, and two products that we have, or actually one product. It's called GitHub Enterprise now. It used to be called GitHub FI, which was the old version of it. So, I'm assuming everyone here has at least heard of GitHub. Is that a safe assumption? Has anyone heard of GitHub Enterprise? Okay, we have a few people. So GitHub Enterprise is basically the exact same thing as GitHub. We'll get into just how exactly the same it is in a little bit, but it's essentially identical. But it originally started life as a product called GitHub FI. This was back in 2009. So at that time, we had, in the company as a whole, in all of GitHub, we had 6 employees, and we had exactly 1 person who was doing all the work on GitHub FI. In 2011, which was when I first started at GitHub, we had a total of 25 employees, and we had 2 people working on the GitHub FI team. And this is when we started working on GitHub Enterprise. So GitHub Enterprise was a re-release of GitHub FI that we ended up doing. And then in November of 2011, we re-released GitHub FI as the new GitHub Enterprise with the new site and everything. At that time, the company had grown quite a bit. We had 43 total people, and 7 of those people were on the enterprise team. And that's when we started really selling into the enterprise much more aggressively. Today, and this is accurate as of this morning, I just updated the numbers. As of today, GitHub has 169 employees. Of those 169 employees, we have 18 working on the enterprise team. But the entire sales team that sells all of this into the enterprise out there is 5 people. And that's not just for GitHub Enterprise, that's for the entire company. We don't have multiple teams. So out of 169 people, we have 5 salespeople. You compare this with more traditional companies that have maybe 1,000 employees, and of those 1,000 employees, 500 are salespeople, or more in a lot of cases. And yet, with those 5 people, we have 20% of the Fortune 500 companies, We think that we have over 100,000 users of GitHub Enterprise, but we don't know because we can't actually look into Enterprise. It's run privately behind the firewall. It's run on internal networks, so we can't see it. So we don't actually know how many exact users there are, but based on how many people have bought seats and how many we expect are using them, that's our expectation. And we do about 2 new releases of the code base every month. So every month we have at least, not at least, but we usually have 2 different releases that go out. Compare this with traditional enterprise software. Oracle, for example, will do a release every year and a half, maybe. And when they do that release, you need weeks worth of downtime to get everything done. Our updates take no time at all. But why am I actually telling you all this, right? Why does it matter how many people are at GitHub or how many people built these different products or anything like that? Well, the reason that it matters is because of how quickly we were able to do this and how little effort it actually takes to take a project that's being hosted online, a software as a service project that's been on the internet for a long time, and how easy it can be, relatively speaking, to take that effort and convert it into a product that you can actually sell to traditional companies. So for those of you who might have been to other conferences before, these are actually the titles of 2 different talks that were given by other GitHubbers. One is Double Shipping for Fun and Profit, and the other is How GitHub Uses GitHub to Build GitHub. That's a lot of GitHub. Now, what's really interesting about these 2 points is they're a really good indicator of both how we originally developed Enterprise and then how we continue to work on Enterprise as well as everything else that GitHub does. So Double Shipping for Fun and Profit was a talk that was given by Zach Coleman in 2011, I believe. So this was when we were first getting ready to ship Enterprise. And people were wondering, how did you actually do that? Well, the way that we did it is GitHub Enterprise is github.com. And I mean that very, very literally. There is no separate code base. There's exactly one code base for GitHub and GitHub Enterprise. It's all in one repository. There's no separate branches. It's the exact same code. The only thing that's different is when you actually start up the server process, there's an environment variable called Enterprise, which dictates whether it starts in Enterprise mode or whether it starts in .com mode. But this required a lot of work internally. You can't just decide that you're going to start doing things like this and they magically work, right? You actually have to re-architect the code to make it work in 2 different environments. And the way we did that is by really modularizing everything. Now, GitHub has traditionally been very modular to begin with. A lot of the components internally have been already separated out. But really, when you're going to do this sort of a transition, you have to change everything. You have to, for every single thing that's going to be different in the 2 environments, you have to identify it in code and have some way of finding out how that's done. In our case, we have a helper which basically gets called at the beginning of every single action, and it determines which mode you're running in. And then inside of the function, you can change how it behaves for 2 different things. So for example, there's no use in showing the billing screen on Enterprise, so we just skip that. But the code is still actually there. More importantly though, when you're doing this, you get to minimize duplication of labor. So normally you're working on a project, and then you decide you want to take that same project, make it something slightly different, and start selling that as well, right? Well, when you do this, you now have 2 separate teams that are working on the exact same product, except they're not, right? They're not actually working on the same product. They're working on 2 different products that just look identical to each other, but they're really not. So you have a team of 10 people, and only 5 of them can focus on one product. So in our case, we have 169 people today. If only 70 or 80 of those were working on .com and 70 or 80 were working on Enterprise, that would be a lot of wasted effort. But even more importantly than that, the biggest issue is focus. When as a company, as a team, it doesn't matter if you have 5 employees, 10 employees, or 5,000 employees. When as a company, you can't stay focused on exactly what it is that you need to be working on, the company gets very fragmented and you start to lose the ability to really focus on individual problems. You start to push out bad features, you start to push out bad software. So it's really, really important to maintain your focus. But it's hard to do that if you have multiple teams pulling in multiple different directions. So the way we get around that is to make it so that We don't have multiple people pulling in multiple directions because at the end of the day, it's all exactly the same product. So how exactly does GitHub use GitHub to build GitHub? The number one thing, the single most important thing when developing any software is to dog food everything. Does everyone know what the term dog fooding means? Anyone? Okay. I'll give you a quick description. Dog fooding, well, dog food refers to food for dogs, and dog fooding means eating your own dog food, right? So if you're going to make dog food and you're going to give it to your dog, you should be willing to eat it as well. So when you're making software, the same thing applies. If you're going to make software, and if you're going to expect people to use that software, you should use it as well. Now, GitHub is very fortunate in this regard because we make software for developers. It's really easy to take software for developers and use it yourself because you are a developer, right? But you can't always do that. Sometimes there are things that you're working on that cannot easily be dog-fooded by a developer. But in those cases, you need to find a way to actually still do that. A great example of what we've done, on GitHub.com, we have the entire billing system, right? So you have to go in, you have to put in your credit card, and you have to sign up for GitHub.com to actually use a paid account. Nobody at GitHub really knew how this process worked. We had people who wrote the code, but when would I ever, as an employee of GitHub, when would I ever have an opportunity to go and actually use the billing system? So we decided this is obviously a problem. How are we going to fix it? And the way we fixed it is everybody at GitHub now pays for their own account. So I work there, and I still have to pay the company every month to use my GitHub account. Now that seems crazy, right? But for one, it's $7. GitHub pays me a lot more than $7, fortunately. And on top of that, every single month, I get an email from GitHub telling me, okay, your card has been charged, here's what happened. If there's ever a problem with my credit card, I have to go to the interface. And now we have 169 people who are testing the billing system every month. 169 people at GitHub who are testing it every month. This is how you dog food things that you wouldn't normally use. Just because we wouldn't normally use the billing system doesn't mean that we couldn't find a way to start using it. But the important thing is that you actually do that. You can't just say, well, we couldn't dog food this, so we'll just skip it. We'll assume that it'll be fine for users. It won't. Unless you're a user of your own software, you can't actually know how well it'll work. Now, beyond that, from an actual company perspective, one of the things that's really important is having a distributed workflow. Now, obviously here, we have a lot of Linux developers, people who are very familiar with the open source world. So you're all very familiar with being distributed. The problem is, you're very familiar with being distributed when you're sharing code on projects. When you're working on an open source project, you know what it's like to be distributed. But yet most of you, if you have jobs as developers, you go into a room a lot like this one every day, and you sit by a desk, and you sit by 50 other people who are also sitting at their desk, and you have meetings, and you have discussions, and you talk about things, and so on. And then somebody comes in the following day who wasn't there yesterday, and says what happened yesterday, and all you can show them is your code. You can't actually show them what happened that day because those conversations are now lost. So it's really important to have a way of capturing these conversations. And it just so happens GitHub as a company dog foods their own conversations. We have issues. Anytime something happens that needs attention, that's an issue. Now, you think issues are things you do for software, right? It's a bug in software. And that's perfectly valid. If a program doesn't work the way that it should, you open an issue and you address the issue in that software. But what if something in the company doesn't work the way that it should? As an example, what if you run out of toilet paper? How do you normally fix that? You find somebody who takes care of that thing and you tell them. Why don't you just open an issue that says, we're out of toilet paper? And then somebody can close that issue when it's done. And we actually do that. Not for toilet paper, but for lots of other things. We use all of our tools internally. And the key point here is that by using everything internally, everybody's involved in the same process. So out of 169 people, not everyone is a developer, and yet everyone uses a development tool to actually do their job every day. And finally, cross-team contributions. Now, going back again to more traditional companies, you work in a place where you work on your project, right? You have your project that you're working on, and somebody else has a different project that they're working on. That process is stupid. Because are you ever really just working on one project? We just had a discussion now about WebRTC, right? I'm sure that a few people here at least have played with WebRTC stuff before, and yet I'm guessing most of the people who are working on it are not getting paid to work on it. But you're actually working on two different projects, right? Well, why can't you do that at work? Why can't you work on multiple projects at work? And more importantly, if something affects one of your projects at work, why can't you contribute to the project that affects it? The answer is you should be able to. In the same way that in the open source world you can contribute to multiple projects at the same time, in the corporate world, when you're actually working in a company, you should still be able to contribute to different projects. And by doing so, you set up an environment where you're more involved in what's going on. But enough about technology and enough about GitHub itself as a product. I'm sure most of you have actually tried doing things with GitHub before. Let's talk about the business side of things, right? So you've made this product and you think it's great, but now you actually want to sell it to somebody. Well, in the traditional sales world, there's actually science behind sales, believe it or not, or a kind of science. And one of the things they talk about is the 7-step sales model. That's a lot of S's, and if I get too close to the microphone, it sounds really weird. The 7-step sales process basically identifies how you sell something to someone, right? But that's true for just about anything. If you're buying a car, the process you're going to go through is very similar to the process that I went through yesterday when I had to buy a new SIM for my phone at the T-Mobile shop, which, by the way, was a giant pain. And I know at least one person here works at T-Mobile. So in all of these processes, you have these different steps of the sales process. And the third step of the 7-step sales process is identifying the decision maker, right? This is a term you hear all the time in business, is who is the decision maker? And what they really want to know is who controls the money. If I'm going to be selling you something, I want to know who is actually going to pay for that something. Because if you're talking to me but you're not paying, I don't care. What I care about is who's actually going to pay for this product. But there's a problem with that. The problem is who actually pays for the product can be a bunch of different people. It can be the CEO of a company. It can be the CTO of a company. It can be the CIO of a company. It's a lot of C some things. It could be a CFO of a company. It could be a VP of engineering, right? These are all people who might have control of a budget at a large company. It's very different from when you buy something personally. You just take money out of your pocket and you pay for it. At a large company, you have lots and lots of people who are involved in this process, and only one of those is ultimately responsible for paying for the actual software. So all of these people could be making a decision, but are they really making that particular decision? If you want to buy GitHub, if you want to bring GitHub into where you work, does the CEO know anything about GitHub? Probably not. The CEO knows business things, right? The CEO doesn't actually know what GitHub is. So ultimately, the CEO is not the one making the decision. The people who make the decision are the developers. So the people who are actually writing the code are the ones who actually decide, are we going to use this product or not? This is relevant for us because we sell to developers. If you sell your product to somebody else, if your target audience is not developers, you should still know who that somebody is. Who's actually going to be using what you're selling, not who is going to be paying for what it is you're selling. 1 second. That's better. The reason this is all relevant is because developing software is really hard. In this context, we're talking about working with developers, and that's something that is very complicated. It's not like making pancakes. It's something that takes a lot of effort. And because of that, people who are CEOs can't possibly have the necessary skill set to do it. So they don't have the necessary context to do it. The CEO doesn't know what goes into the development process, so therefore the CEO can't know what a good tool for that process is. So in turn, the CEO has to rely on having an expert who can tell people, or who can tell them what the needs of this particular tool are. And those experts are the developers. And most importantly, one of these developers becomes a champion. Now, this is the most important part of this kind of modern, if you will, way of selling into the enterprise. Traditionally, you didn't have champions. Traditionally, if you're buying Oracle software, for example, the way that this works is a salesperson pushes their way in, they start talking to somebody, and then they try to work their way up to somebody who has money, and they convince them to give them that money. And then that someone buys software that really sucks, and then you as the developers are told, here, use this. You don't want to use it, it sucks. But you were never involved in the decision, right? The better way to do this is to involve the developers in the decision early on. Let them figure out what they need, and then worry about how to pay for it. But when you have that, how do you go from a bunch of developers who know what they want to actually having somebody pay for it? The way you do that is you get a champion, right? Anybody in here, anybody who's a developer at a company could be the champion for GitHub Enterprise. Anybody who is a musician could be the champion for whatever it is that they use to make music, I don't know. But you need to identify a champion. This is somebody who really cares about getting this done. And once you have a champion, there's a lot of benefits that come out of that process. The biggest one from a sales perspective is you have very easy access to the necessary parties that are involved in this process, right? So normally if I'm going to be selling, I need to talk at some point to the CEO or somebody like that. But if I tell that person that I want to have a meeting, they're not going to want to talk to me because I'm a sales guy. So instead, you work with a champion. A champion is somebody who actually cares about this happening and goes up to those people and says, okay, we need to talk to this guy from GitHub about using their software. More importantly, if you remember way back on the first slide, I mentioned, or actually the third slide, I mentioned that we have 5 salespeople, right? 5 salespeople selling into the enterprise doesn't make a lot of effort, doesn't make a lot of a dent, right? We can only do so much because there's only 5 of us. So what ends up happening is when we have a champion, every champion is an additional salesperson. Every champion is an extra person who is now able to promote this idea internally. More importantly, we're still focused on being a SaaS product, right? What we've always done is we've run github.com and we've had a site set up where you pay for it monthly. You use it for as long as you want, you pay for it monthly, and that's it. But in traditional software, you end up selling a big chunk of something up front and getting a lot of money for it, and then you kind of forget about it. Well, we don't do that. When we sell GitHub Enterprise, we sell it as a subscription. So even though it's something you're buying to run on your servers, you still pay for it as a subscription. That means that I don't care how much I sell to you up front. I don't have to go into a conversation with somebody and convince them to spend $1 million. I can go into a conversation with somebody and convince them to spend $5,000, which for big companies is much, much easier. But once that's done, now everybody else can come in and say, hey, I want to use this too. Okay, that's another $5,000. And now these other people come in and they want to use it as well. Okay, that's another $50,000, et cetera, et cetera. And then you get up to the $1 million mark with a lot less effort. But the way that it's all been possible is because you've had somebody on the inside. You've had somebody helping you out. You've had somebody driving this process. So finally, let's talk about sales and how we do sales at GitHub. There are ways that salespeople are typically treated, and a lot of these are very widely recognized terms in the English-speaking sales world, right? The most offensive one to me is the coin-driven operator. Does anyone know what coin-driven operator refers to? No? It's like a vending machine. When you go to buy a drink from a machine, you put money in and you get a drink out, right? Well, the idea is that salespeople are the same way. When you have salespeople at a company, you feed them very small amounts of money and they produce very large amounts of money, right? But that's really offensive because I'm a person. I'm not a machine. I'm not just going to sit here and create money for you, right? I actually care about what I'm doing. Now, you all are developers. You don't get treated as coin-driven operators. Nobody thinks that they just bring you in and pay you money and you create more money. They think you create code. But in reality, you're the ones who are creating money. When you're writing code, you're writing the actual product. You're creating actual value. You're creating the thing that's actually worth something. Salespeople are doing the same thing. We are building something. We're building relationships with customers. We're building a way to make sure that this keeps happening and make sure the relationship keeps being healthy in the long term. But then how do you actually hire good salespeople? If I just wanted to hire salespeople, I could go to Oracle and I could find 200 salespeople, which for Oracle is something like 1% of their sales force, if even. They wouldn't even notice it. And now we have 200 salespeople, right? But the problem is they would all suck. Because most salespeople suck. And this is international. It doesn't matter if you're dealing with salespeople in the US, if you're dealing with salespeople in Croatia, if you're dealing with salespeople anywhere else. Anybody that is trying to sell you something sucks. And you don't want to talk to them. That's a global thing, right? So how do you make it so that it doesn't suck? How do you get into a situation where you can be talking to a salesperson and not hate their guts? Well, the first one is you don't get salespeople, right? People hate talking to salespeople. So far, you've heard me talking for 24 minutes. Have I sounded like a salesperson? Who said yes? I'll deal with that later. But the first thing is you don't hire salespeople, right? In my particular case, I worked as a developer for 10 years before I ever got into sales. So most of the people who we have on the team came from a technical background. So when you talk to them, it's just like talking to anybody here. When we go for a coffee break after this, we're going to have conversations about things. And those are very easy conversations because nobody's trying to sell anyone anything. Well, when you have a bunch of developers, it's very easy to have those conversations as well. And more importantly, when you have a bunch of developers coming in to become salespeople, they don't have any bad habits that you need to break, right? Picking up good habits is pretty easy. Breaking bad habits is really hard. So instead of hiring people who have a bunch of bad habits and then trying to train those out of them, just hire people who either have good habits or who have no habits at all and teach them what the good habits are. The other big thing is to unspecialize. This is not actually a word. But, and I did look it up, by the way. What we're actually talking about with unspecializing is we've all spent our entire lives getting better and better at one particular thing, right? I think for most people here, that one particular thing is technology, right? Some of us have specialized even further. Some people specialize in Java, some specialize in Ruby, some specialize in JavaScript, whatever, right? You have lots of different specializations. But sometimes it's important to actually get away from that. Because in the sales process, if you specialize too much, you end up with a salesperson who cannot actually talk to you about the product they're selling. You end up talking to a developer, who we talked about before is the decision maker that we care about, right? So you end up talking to a developer, and yet you can't talk to them about anything that they actually understand. So the way you get around this is by making sure that the salespeople actually have a technical background, which in turn means that they cannot be specialists in sales. They have to be generalists of everything. And then the most important thing, well, I think I've said that for a lot of things at this point, but one of the most important things is to hire communicators and not pushers. What this means is that in the traditional sales process, the people who are selling you things are the pushers. When you go to buy a car, you have this guy who comes up to you and says, "Hey, how you doing, buddy? You want to buy a car? I'll give you a good deal. I'll give you 10% off. What do you think? Oh, you don't like that? 15% off. Come on. It's great. Look at it. It's red. It's got great paint job. Wonderful car. You should just drive it home right now. Your wife, she won't mind. Just get in and drive off the lot right now." Would you actually buy a car from that guy? I wouldn't. And yet, you probably did buy a car from that guy. If you have a car, and if you didn't buy it from a friend, that's probably the process you went through. And that's ridiculous. What you need are not people who try to push you into making a decision. You need people who are willing to communicate with you. People who are willing to have a conversation with you and find out what is it you actually need. Do you need a car? Maybe you don't. Maybe what you actually need is a horse. And that's perfectly fine, right? If you come to me and you say, well, I want to go horseback riding, can I buy a car? I'm going to say no. Buy a horse, right? Why would you buy a car for that? And yet people do that with software all the time. People even do that with GitHub. People come to us and say, well, we want to make more open source software. Can we buy GitHub? Yes, you can buy GitHub, but you could start by, hiring a developer. That might help a little bit with actually developing open source software. So you need people who are able to actually communicate, people who are able to tell you what it is you do and don't need. And if what you don't need is their product, that's perfectly fine. The next thing is optimizing for happiness. And this is a term that we use internally at GitHub all the time. I have at least 2 GitHubbers here who can attest to that. Feel free to badger them with questions later, by the way. Optimizing for happiness is true in everything at GitHub. People do it in development, people do it in sales, people do it everywhere. And what it means is when you're working on any sort of a process, you need to optimize that process primarily for happiness. This means things like how you do sales. This means things like how you write software. This also means things like how the merge button on a pull request works, right? If you're writing a feature, if you're writing something in software, you can optimize for speed, you can optimize for performance, you can do all these things. But what's really important is optimizing for happiness. You have to identify what is going to make the user happy or unhappy and optimize for that. So internally, we optimize our processes to make our users happier, right? In this case, we're talking about sales. So we optimize the processes around sales to make salespeople happier, and we optimize the sales process to make our customers happier because they become the users of the sales process. But then what does that actually mean, right? It's easy to say you should optimize for happiness, but how do you actually do that? Well, the first step is you build sales teams and not teams of individuals. So typically, that sales guy that I gave you an example of, the guy trying to sell you a car, that's an individual, right? He might work with 15 or 20 other people, but they're all individuals. They don't actually work together. They're all just out trying to help themselves. We say, well, no, that's not a good way to work. You should be working in teams, right? We write our software in teams. Why don't we sell in teams? So we did. People think we're crazy. To this day, when I talk to people who don't work at GitHub, they think we're crazy, but it actually works really well. The other big one is removing negative incentives. And what I mean specifically with this is killing commissions. Commissions have been used in sales forever, right? But commissions are stupid. Because normally what you're saying is, okay, you're going to sell this for $100, and because of that, I'm going to give you $10, right? That sounds great. That sounds like, okay, if I sell 2 of these, now I get $20. If I sell 10 of these, I get $100, right? The more that I sell, the more that I make. We have a room full of developers here. Would you work at a place where they paid you by the line of code that you wrote? Somebody's just trolling me. Either that or you care a lot about money. Good developers know that lines of code don't matter, right? It's all about what that code does. Something that's very difficult to explain to managers a lot of the time is why you worked on this problem for 8 hours, and when you were done, you had 4 lines of code to show for it, right? You try to talk to the manager, and they're just like, oh, this was 8 hours of work. Why is there only 4 lines of code? Well, because those 4 lines of code fixed a really, really hard problem that took 8 hours to solve, right? So if you got paid by lines of code, you would get nothing for that. And the guy next to you, who is a shitty programmer, would solve the same problem with 400 lines of code. It would have all sorts of bugs. It would be really slow. Nobody would want to maintain it. And he would get paid 10 times more than you got paid. Does that make sense? Doesn't make sense to me. But we do that with sales all the time. We say, well, you know what? I don't care what you do. I don't care how pushy you are. I don't care what you say to people. I don't care what you do. I don't care how you make the company look. If you just sell more, we'll give you more money. And this is why people hate salespeople. So we get rid of that. We say, you know what? Let's not worry about commissions. Let's just give everybody a salary. Developers get a salary, salespeople get a salary, everybody stays happy. And by doing that, you've now done something really, really important in the actual sales process. Now, the incentives that your employees have, or the goals that your employees have, are the exact same goals that your customers have. What you want to do is you want, as a salesperson, to get these people to use GitHub Enterprise, right? You want them to use it. You don't care about the money. You don't care about them paying for it. You don't care about how big of a discount you're going to give or how much money you're going to get out of it. You care about them actually using it internally to do actual work. And when they're coming to talk to you about using this, what do they care about? They care about using it internally. Now you have the same goal. Now you're not fighting against these people. You're doing the exact same thing. And the final point is setting good goals for people, right? Going back to commissions again. If your primary concern is money, you're going to set goals around money. But what do you actually do when you do that? When all of your goals are money-based, you're just telling people, well, keep selling or keep doing something until we get a certain amount of money. I don't care what you do. I don't care what decisions you make. I don't care how much long-term harm you cause to the company. Just get this number higher, right? And then what happens is you get that number higher and people hate working there. People hate working with you. People hate your software. You start making shitty software. People stop buying it. And now you have 50 problems that you would not have had if you hadn't just made that one bad goal. So it's really important to identify what good goals are and what bad goals are and try to make sure that you focus on the right one. And now finally, with all of this stuff covered, how can you do this for yourself? How can this actually apply to any other product other than GitHub Enterprise? And I figured this slide would probably do better translated. Does anybody at all, well, except for Vlado, I think you probably know, but does anyone else know what eye of newt, toe of frog, and wool of bat is referring to? Okay, that's what I figured, sadly. It's Shakespeare. There's a line in Shakespeare in, I think it's Macbeth, where there's witches making a brew. And the ingredients that they use are eye of newt, toe of frog, wool of bat. What I wanted to do is find a Croatian translation of Shakespeare and find the actual version of that, but I didn't have time, sadly. But what is the recipe to use to actually replicating this sort of success? Number one, the single most important thing is start with a good product. If you have a shitty product, you can't do anything. If you have a shitty product, nobody's going to buy it. Nobody's going to want to sell it. Nobody's going to want to work on it. Now you don't have a business. If you as a developer don't want to work on a particular problem, you don't have a business. And why don't you want to work on it? Because it sucks, right? If it was good, if you actually wanted to use it and wanted to work on it, you'd be motivated to do it. If it was a good product, people would want to buy it. And if people want to buy it, you don't really need salespeople. People want to buy something, they'll go and they'll find it, right? At that point, you just need salespeople to help them with that process. You don't need somebody to push a bad idea on somebody else. Second, you have to let design and development drive. Now, I'm going to get on my little soapbox here and potentially anger a bunch of people. I have been a Linux user for 12 years. I started using Debian in 1999. And I used that exclusively until 2008, which is when I got my first Mac. And now I use this all the time. And the reason is the Linux world sucks at design. We never had anything that looked good in Linux until Ubuntu came along, right? And that's a problem. Because even I as a developer, even somebody who spends all day in a terminal, you still actually care about how things look. You still actually care about how things behave. If you're working in a terminal and it's really slow, you're going to notice that. If you're working in a terminal and it's ugly and it's hard to read, you're going to notice that as well. And yet, most people think, oh, it's a terminal. The only thing that's important is can I put commands into it? Well, no, what's also really important is when you type that command into it, how does the output come out? If you're using the VGA display on a Linux machine and you have more than one screen of data coming out, it's basically going to scroll up really slowly and kind of jitter across the screen. If you have a high resolution display, you can have multiple screens of data just smoothly scroll across the screen. That's really important. And that is where design comes into the process. You have to make sure that everything looks good, that everything behaves the way that it should. And if you don't let designers drive this process, you're not going to have a good product. If you just let developers make purely technical decisions, you're going to have a bad product. We have, out of 169 people, we have, I think, 30 or 40 designers. And we have probably 80 developers. So we have a lot fewer designers than we have developers. But they're a very, very important part of the team. From a more business-oriented standpoint, you have to foster mutual respect with customers. And what this means is, once again, getting away from that sales guy, getting away from the pushy guy trying to sell you a car. You should have a good relationship with the people who you're selling to, right? These are users. These are people who are actually using your software. If you're working on an open source project and somebody's actually using your project, you're going to like that person. You're going to be happy that they're using something that you're working on. And yet, with typical sales, this gets completely lost because people just don't have that relationship anymore. And now, once you've done all these things, once you've designed a product that doesn't suck, which is really hard, once you've allowed the designers to actually drive the process and make sure you make good decisions about it, and once you've set up a sales process that allows you to have a good relationship with your customers, now you can get to step 4, which is profit. And that's what I have for you. But now we still have some time left, so questions?
Oh. You mentioned you are actually selling GitHub Enterprise as a subscription model to the enterprises. Did you ever had a problem with enterprises require some kind of a capital investment as opposed to the subscription model, and how do you address that?
We actually have this pretty commonly with German companies. In the US, it's not as big of a problem, but with companies in Germany and Switzerland and so on, they actually want it to be a capital expense. The way you actually get around that is, in most countries, capital expenses are defined as things that are used for more than 3 years. So what we do is we set up an agreement with the customer that says, okay, you're going to buy the subscription, but you're going to buy it for a minimum of 3 years. And now it becomes a capital expense that could actually be treated that way for accounting needs. Anyone else?
Next question.
Rebase or merge? No, I'm kidding. I follow GitHub, and there's less and less new GitHubber that are developers, and I don't know if this is where you're going, less developers, more PR or something. I'm a user, so I'm really more interesting. Are you interested with the mobile? Because I have no complaint with the desktop version, but there's not too much for the mobile. Even the Android application is not the top. So
I started at GitHub in 2011. That was 2.5 years ago. And my very first day there, I had a conversation with the founders of the company. And we talked about what my first day was going to be like and what I would be working on and so on. And they said at the end of that, do you have any questions? And my first question on my very first day at GitHub was, when is the mobile experience not going to suck? And they said, we're working on it. And the good part is, we are working on it. You just can't see it yet. The Android app was part of that. The iPhone app was part of that. But they're not really headed in a good direction. There is mobile stuff happening. There is mobile stuff being worked on. And we have hired people who specialize in mobile things. But it's a lot of work. It's really, really hard to take something as complex as GitHub and actually make it mobile friendly, right? Anybody could take the site and just make it display properly on a phone. That's not a problem. But that's not enough. What's important is, if you're looking at code on a phone, the way to look at that is not by having larger text on your mobile view. The way to do that is to actually rethink how you display that code. And that's the really hard part. And there are people working on that. And this is also why, if you've been following kind of who we hire and so on, you'll see we've been hiring a lot more UX people. And a big part of that is based around that, is we need to understand how people use things and how people think about things to be able to get a better mobile view of that.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
Next question. There was more hands before. Dobrica again.
Why did you remove downloads? It caused a lot of pain to some of our projects.
There was actually a very, very long discussion about removing downloads. This went on for about 3 weeks of people arguing inside the company. It actually got pretty heated about whether or not we should do it. And the answer is there's a few different parts to it, right? One big thing is, remember before I said you have to write good software. You have to have a good product. GitHub is a good product. Downloads was not a good feature. Now, I'm not saying that being able to download things from GitHub was not a good feature, but the way you interacted with it sucked. It really did. Nobody liked it. And then on top of that, we collect lots of statistics on everything. So we were able to look at exactly how many people actually use downloads and how many people actually download things from there. And what we found out is that it's less than 1% of all the users on the site that are actually ever even using downloads. So it's a feature that sucks. Nobody uses it. What do you do with that? You kill it. We're going to be bringing things like that back at some point because there are very useful cases for that, primarily open source projects, right? If you have an open source project, you don't want to have to host files for distribution somewhere. So there's a definite need to have a place to do this, and we're going to be fixing that. It's just not ready yet.
Next question.
I see a lot of people from academia here. Can you please tell them something about GitHub Edu or educational?
Absolutely.
They would really like to hear that.
Okay. If you're a student, if you don't already know, you can get a free GitHub account. If you need a GitHub account to do whatever as a student, you can get that for free. You just contact our education team. They can help you out with that. If you're a university that wants to use GitHub, you can also get free accounts set up to do that. More importantly, from my end at least, if you're a university that wants to use GitHub Enterprise, we have a special thing for that as well, which is the unlimited student license. So if you're a university and you want every student in the entire university to be able to use GitHub for free, but have it actually be on your servers, you can actually get GitHub Enterprise and run it at a university and open it up to everyone. We have in the US, I think we have 50 or 60 universities that are already doing this. We have about 10 around Europe. I don't think we have any in Croatia yet, so yes, you do. We do. Excellent. So were you our champion then?
Not really.
Okay.
I just used it.
Well, but we had a champion somewhere. So you have to have somebody who cares about bringing it in. So if you're at a university that doesn't have GitHub and you care about it, you can still make it happen. You just have to start the conversation. Anyone else?
More questions? No?
Nope.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I posljednje večerašnje predavanje, hvala vam što ste izdržali u tokom broju, je jedno vrlo zanimljivo predavanje o dostupnosti Linuxa za osobe s posebnim potrebama koje će održati kolega Igor Švarc, inače osoba koja ne vidi, slijepa osoba, tako da mi je posebno drago sa strane da osoba koja to koristi, želi koristiti, može pričati o tom iskustvu i trenutnim dostignućima na tom polju.
Gdje je mik?
Hoćeš mikrofon u ruku?
Da. Samo da ja... Sad ti spoji da ja... Jesi otvorila? Ne.
Trebamo
u redu, budem ja mikrofon
prezentaciju.
So we should just prepare that. So could you wait, please, for a moment?
Okay.
I will. So good afternoon to everyone. I know it's late afternoon, but I hope you'll enjoy and you'll be satisfied with my talk. So firstly, to introduce myself shortly, my name is Igor Švarc. I have bachelor's degree in informatics technology at the Faculty of Organization and Informatics in Varaždin. And now I'm working there to have first work experience. I'm working there, it's like a measurement of Croatian government to help people to gain their first work experience. Here is my email address, my working email address. If you wanna, you might drop me a line and I'll gladly reply to you. So, firstly, we should define what's accessibility in general. Accessibility in general is, could I, for example, go from place A to place B without any strong barriers? So, we have in our city, in city of Varaždin, we have campus and we have two buildings of our university. We have PO.I.N.T and PO.I.N.T. And to get to PO.I.N.T is really, really easier than to go to PO.I.N.T. So we might say it's more accessible to access PO.I.N.T than PO.I.N.T, although PO.I.N.T is near our campus than PO.I.N.T is. If we are talking about the technologies, it means that some persons with some disablements should use some OS. So, there are several types of disablement. There are cognitive disablement, blindness, deafness, etc. And all of those people should some kind of assistive, or I like to say additional technology. And why I like this term additional and not assistive technology? Because technologies such as Orca or Caribou, I'll talk about them now lately, are built in GNOME 3. But at the other side, we have technologies such as note takers that are really, really assistive technologies. So I mentioned some technologies, and it's time to define them all in detail. So screen reader is such technology that allows the blind person to use the computer. In order to use the computer, firstly, screen reader should get information from somewhere. In order to get information from somewhere, screen reader should use something called accessibility platform. And there are several accessibility platforms for several operating systems. I lately talk about the ATSPI 1 and 2, and there is MSAA, there is UI2, etc., etc. To provide info to the user, screen reader may use two components. The first one is speech synthesizer. Speech synthesizer is a software or hardware device that provides info that obtained from the screen reader to the user. And speech synthesizer is using a speech server. A speech server is something like driver. You know what the drivers are, right? So what driver is to the device, speech server is to the speech synthesis. Okay? Braille display device, at the other hand, is a tactile device that uses Braille dots or Braille notation to display info that it gets either as a daemon, I'll refer to that later, or from a screen reader. So, to summarize, at the one hand, we have operating system, assistive technology, accessibility platform, screen reader, and some mean to provide this info to the user. Except screen readers, as I said earlier, there are on-screen keyboards, there are magnifiers, etc. So, the audience, right? I thought to talk about it as a user, sysadmin, and developer, but as I noticed, I could make a really good introduction in order for people to understand me. I know one of you listened to me 2007, and I hope it'll not be so boring to you. So I said some things then, but I should repeat it now because we have new people that are here. Yeah. So, when I talk with people, they say me, okay, Igor, you like Linux because you might use console, you don't use GUI, you don't need GUI, etc., etc. This is actually not true. So when I'm at job, I use the command line. I use the GNOME terminal to connect to places I should connect to. But I want to say I use the command line and GUI extensively. Why this slide? There are console technologies dedicated to work with console as such, and there are GUI technologies that communicate between themselves. So, first effort in general for blind to use GUI was the GNOME's effort called ATSPI. And ATSPI means Assistive Technology Service Provider Interface. I see on this slide, as I can recall, I should talk about libraries as well. but I won't do this, right? So AtSpy has its helpers such as ATK, and ATK, for example, helps AtSpy to gain the information from the GNOME's toolkit. I'm sometimes confused, so excuse me. So AtSpy 1 was using the Corba and Orbit as its inter-process communications mechanism. And technologies that were used by AtSpy 1 were, for example, GOC, so GNOME on-screen keyboard, was Copernicus. It was a really nice screen reader that I used for the first time when I came here at 2007, etc. So I couldn't spend any words on AtSpy 1, so it's passed, and we go next. So as I recall, the next slide is AtSpy 2. So why AtSpy 2? As I said previously, technologies such as Orbit and Corba was deprecated or are on the good way to be deprecated. I don't know whether they are using in GNOME 3. I think they are not used. AtSpy 2 has its benefits. For example, one could use now root GUI applications. So one could use applications as root in GUI. For example, if I have GNOME desktop with AtSpy 1 or AtSpy based on Corba, if I would open gparted application, it could not be usable. So if I would open it through the menus, right, without any tweaking, without any previous tweaking, I would get nothing. Now, with AtSpy 2, there isn't any need for such tweaking. The technologies that are using AtSpy 2 are, for example, Caribou. I think it's the on-screen keyboard app. And of course, it's Orca, and I'll refer to Orca somewhat later. Let's go. So the goal of this slide is to explain the technologies that blind user can use today and that are responsive. One of those technologies is a speak-up console screen reader. The speak-up, as I said, is a console screen reader, and it might be used with either software or hardware speech synthesis, and because of its console-based, it doesn't need any AT platforms such as AtSpy. it can get directly information from the kernel. So it can be compiled into the kernel as a kernel module. And when you write at your etc modules, right, it depends upon distro. If you call it, and if you call its wrapper eSpeakup, you will get system that will talk from the boot up, and you will absolutely have no need for GUI. The next technology we are using now is Orca. Orca is a application, a screen reader that allows us to integrate with the GNOME desktop interface. It was announced, I think, in GNOME 2.16. So I can say Orca is hero, right? It used ETSPI 1 and ETSPI 2, and Caribou, for example, just used ETSPI 2, right? So Orca can use the extensive number of speech synthesizers and braille displays through either speech dispatcher or BRLTTY daemon. One thing I forgot to say is, why is accessibility platform so important? I have no habit to come back to things, but let's, for example, say that you have you did install of OpenSUSE at 12.2, right, with the GNOME as its default DE, and you do install XFCE or LXDE. So XFCE and LXDE are using the GTK, right, as its toolkit. And if you don't turn on assistive platform, there isn't any Orca in this world that will help you, right? Because assistive platform isn't turned on, right? So this is just a remark I forgot to say when it's time to say it. The next technology we are using is BRLTTY. It's really a daemon. You all know what daemon is. And it can be loaded while computer starts. And it shows the info on the braille display, what's happening. And while I was preparing for this presentation, I read that BRLTTY supports some speech synthesis. It makes me happy since I don't have braille display, and braille displays are really, really expensive devices. So we can use BRLTTY either in console or as a helper with Orca to help us to work with the braille displays. So the next few things here are speech synthesis engines. And if you remember, I said that one of the ways screen reader gives us info is through the speech synthesis engine. So those few engines are in existence, and one could use them in Linux. So, to be honest, if you want to use Umbrella, you could do some tweaking and tinkering, but the most usable engine in Linux, as I know today, is eSpeak. It was interesting that before we used eSpeak, so in the ages of Copernicus in 2006 or 2007, we used Festival. And Festival has cool HTS voices, right? Speech Hub isn't in fact speech synthesis itself. It's speech server. Do you recall? Speech servers help speech synthesis to work. They're something like drivers, right? So Speech Hub wants to integrate as much speech engines as possible. And as I know, they integrated eSpeak, Pico, and Merit ETS. Right. So we are talking about present, right? We talked about the present from the AtSpy too, right? The first desktop blind people used that was really GUI desktop was GNOME 2. So if we use GNOME 2, it's natural that we use GNOME Classic, right? GNOME Classic is some effort to have GNOME 2 alive. So when GNOME team starts to develop GNOME Shell, blind community ask themselves how long it will take to write, to make it accessible, to write additional plugins to communicate with AtSpy. And with the 3.0, we had a OpenSUSE test images. I couldn't do anything with GNOME Shell, right? And I began to use GNOME Shell in 3.4, right? And I'm using GNOME Classic as well. The next accessible desktop, or that is trying to be accessible, is Unity. All of you know what Unity is. And this is the right time to mention a new plugin that's being worked on, and this is Qt AtSpy, right? Qt AtSpy helps KDE applications to provide info to AtSpy and then from AtSpy to the user. So, how could we know that some KDE application works or not? Very simply. On your GNOME system, install some KDE app that's not supported by Qt. It might be, for example, Calligra. I don't know. If you open that app, a screen reader or Orca will say either inaccessible or won't say anything. And here comes importance of plugins, right? Additional accessibility plugins. Since XFCE is GTK based, it should be compiled to support GNOME, and we might turn it on. We might turn its accessibility feature on via the xfconf utility. There is a similar procedure for LXDE as well. Concerning enlightenment, I saw on one of the lists that it's being prepared, so just I'm announcing it, that it will be prepared, I hope, in some future. This slide is for you to think, right? Several years ago, we had several groups. You remember we have SOC, we had the HSS, or SSH, sorry. And then Ivan suggested, why don't you create interest groups? Why would you have your own group? And first of all, here are distros that are targeted especially to blind people. And one such distro is Linux. Linux was founded by Professor Sales, and it was founded at the age of ETSPI 1. So you know, we couldn't communicate with root apps, not with root apps, with applications as root, without tinkering and tweaking. So Professor Sales did just fix. I think it was one of his fixes in order to allow this to happen with ETSPI 1, right? The other problem was that speech dispatcher hangs. Speech dispatcher is one of the servers that, one of the speech servers. I explained a few times what speech server is, right? So Linux has, it's really, I don't want to say Linux is unusable or unimportant or, I don't know. But I think these were the biggest good points of Linux at that age. Now, we moved to the ETSPI 2. And now, everyone could, on his SUSE system, for example, type Alt F2 and type gparted. And it's open gparted that will be accessible, right? And all of you know that gparted needs root access, of course, if you want to perform something useful with it, right? So that's the power of ETSPI 2. So every distro that comes with GNOME 3, I'm talking about major distros such as Fedora or OpenSUSE, now came with basic accessibility. So with Orca, I'm not sure does Fedora come with BRLTTY, but I know that OpenSUSE comes. And as I know, BRLTTY starts by default in OpenSUSE. So the purpose of this slide was just to think, do we really need special distros targeted, or we should have initial special experts group in every mainstream distro. Yes, and why did I put Arch here? One might ask himself. If you look to the Arch wiki, you will see that it has special accessibility category. And there are really, really useful articles there. So, one point as well. If we do have Linux or Sonar, should other distros stop worrying about accessibility? No. No. So that's the main purpose of this slide. So here are the links, but I put here 10 links, but some of those links are broken. So what? Questions? No, yes.
Ima kakvih pitanja?
Možete i na hrvatskom, naravno.
Evo ima jedno pitanje.
Slušam.
Hello, Mattia Shukli from FSFE. So I was wondering, have you noticed any difference between Linux and any other operating system? Are we way back behind, or are things equal in other systems as well?
Mm-hmm. So
Može i na hrvatskom.
You were asking me, is Linux more accessible or less accessible?
Basically, yes.
You like to put the tricky questions. I forgot to say, because I think it's really complex infrastructure, right? And I didn't mention some little programs. So all of you who are sysadmins know what the shell scripts are. In screen reader technology, every screen reader on every operating system has some kind of scripting language. So, if, for example, I have Cubase, I see that Cubase isn't accessible, I'll make scripts and make it accessible. So it's really, really heavy to... So just to compare it, if Calligra would be so popular, teams would make scripts and do it accessible. Do you get the point?
Yes.
What about differences between Windows and Linux?
Mm-hmm. So Windows, macOS, and Linux are all of them relying on their A11Y platforms. So there is a famous proprietary Windows screen reader. I don't want to name it, right? And before I wanted to install a new version, it wanted me to upgrade the whole accessibility platform. And you see now how dependent it is with one another. Mac, as I'm informed, has accessibility built it in. I don't know from when, but I don't use Mac, so I cannot guarantee. Concerning Linux, unfortunately, GNOME is only GUI interface. I mean, there is Emacs, but Emacs has its X interface, and there is an Emacs speak. But I think it's really complex to use. But GNOME was really interface that built in the A11y infrastructure straight away. When you look in GNOME 3, just try to remove some core app in the GNOME 3. What will happen? Remove half of the GNOME 3, including the accessibility technology. Još pitanja?
Ima još jedno pitanje, samo malo.
Right. AdSpy supports communicating with Mozilla's accessibility engines. So tagging is important, headings are important, etc. So more questions?
Yes.
Hi, Željko Filipin from Wikimedia Foundation. So how productive are you like on your day job? Like can you get the job done? Or like is it really hard? Do you need any assistance, or can you just sit at a laptop and work 8 hours?
So as a guy who works to have first job experience, I may say that I'm working at least 8 hours on Debian Wheezy at job, and I can really do whatever I should do with it. So I forgot to say, these days we have at least 2 apps to accomplish one task. For example, to browse the web, we have either SeaMonkey or Firefox. Or to listen to the music, we have, I don't know, Audacious or Rhythmbox. Or to write documents, LibreOffice or OpenOffice. So it gets really, really improved every day.
Još jedno pitanje, još 2 pitanja.
Zlatko Papić ponovo, da li ste probali sa e-speakom, Embrolu i hrvatski CR1 bazu Difona?
To vam je dosta stara snimka. Probao jesam. Doduše ne na Linuxu, jer trenutno nemam vremena za, kak bi se to na hrvatskom reklo, tweaking and tinkering. Tako da, na Linuxu nisam probao tu varijantu, ali inače jesam.
I samo Speak Up radi fino u Chromu, a uopće ne radi u Chromiumu.
Ne. Dakle, Chrome ima Pico TTS. Dakle, Googlovci su, mislim da je to Googleov, Googleov sintetizator Pico, i on radi sa Chromeom. Nažalost, to je tipičan primjer text-to-speech aplikacije, odnosno text-to-speech pristupa koji zapravo ne volim osobno. Jer tako bismo onda mogli imati, ne znam, Firefox koji bi imao nekakvu svoju sintezu i davao njoj informacije, pa ne znam, Office, pa ovo, pa ono i tako dalje u nedogled.
Hvala lijepo.
Još jedno pitanje.
This will be again a tricky question, I'm sorry. I'm wondering about the community, and I'm thinking of both sides, both community that is using, and probably also, as you mentioned, writing your own scripts to help yourselves. How does that operate? How well are you collaborating? And second part of the question, what would you want the wider community, I mean, different projects, right? Different libraries, different distros to consider?
Right. Firstly, I'll reply to the second question. I would like every major distro, but every major distro, to have its accessibility team. I remember that OpenSUSE, for example, had one such team. What was the first part? Scripts?
The first part of the question was how well do different communities that work on or with accessibility tools work together?
So, as I know, Linux and Sonar, I didn't talk much about Sonar. Linux and Sonar doesn't work together. I don't know why. There aren't some specs of the Sonar distro. Why are they doing that distro? So, unfortunately not. They are not working together.
Is there any reason why not? Because it seems like a huge pity, because it's I mean
it is pity, but okay. One of the Linux developers just wondered why this guy made a new distro when it's Linux already here, or when we might use some mainstream distro.
So if sorry to drag on, but I'm sorry, I'm not really familiar with all these tool sets. But I wonder at which level do they apply? Because you mentioned that GNOME is the best supported at the moment, so I suppose most of these are on top of GTK. How low level are these? What is the common ground to build upon with different projects? For example, Qt and probably other frameworks as well.
So the Linux Foundation that makes, that sponsors that SPI 2 wants to make a standard for accessibility. Because at SPI 1 was exclusively for GNOME 2. And that SPI 2 allows us to add some plugins such as Qt or Kali or something like that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Još pitanja možda? Nema više. Puno hvala, ovo je bilo stvarno posebno iskustvo. Molim veliki aplauz za Igora Švarca.
Hvala, thank you.
Ali isto tako, poseban aplauz za Luciju Pilić koja mu pravila društvo da nas pomogla oko svega. Evo, hvala puno. Hvala vam što ste izdržali cijeli dan. Vidim da si neki već kapaju, neke kapi u oči. Ako tako nastavimo, onda ćemo morati svi dobiti jednu dozu toga. Hvala vam puno što ste izdržali. Vidimo se sutra, nastavljamo sa ovako malo hardcore geekovskim temama jačima. Vidimo se sutra. stvar. Svaka čast.